Welcome to the scurrychurchofchrist.org. The Bible says in Hosea chapter 4 and verse 6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Please don't let this happen to you. Feel free to contact us at scurrychurchofchrist.org, where you can visit us, and any Bible question that you may have, we will do our best to answer. We are so glad you decided to visit us. Good morning. We'll turn to Exodus chapter 24. Let's get right at it. Exodus chapter 24. What do we learn from Exodus 24? Notice what happens here in Exodus 24. Remember, the things written aforetime were written for our learning. These things are written for us. And so notice something here about Moses. You see Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders. But notice verse 1, now watch, of chapter 24 of Exodus. Then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and you shall worship. Notice what he says here. You shall worship at a distance. Now watch. He said Moses alone, but everyone else, you stay. You're going to worship, but you're going to worship at a distance. He said Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, only Moses, but they shall not come near. Nor shall the people come up with him. Only Moses. But notice they have to stay, but they're going to worship at a distance. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. See? Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls, young bulls, and as peace offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Now watch this. Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, now notice what they said. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will be obedient. So notice their words. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. Okay? Look at verse 8. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. But notice after they said the words, and Moses took blood and sprinkled it on the people. And notice what he said, behold, the blood of the covenant. Now, Jesus uses that the way Jesus uses this in the new covenant. The blood of the covenant. You see, which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. But notice this. So, notice this. So after the blood was sprinkled on the people, see, they said the words in verse 17, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. After they made that confession, see, God, remember, Moses went up to God, and God gave him the words of instructions, the ordinances, the rules, and what he said, they said, we will do, we will be obedient. Okay. So God ratified that by blood. In other words, he made it official. Now, Leviticus 17:14, life is in the blood. And so you see there's purification involved. You see? But I want you to grasp this. There's some purification involved, but it's the blood of this covenant. But it's also, you see there, they're going to enter a new relationship with God. So it's not only purification, they're going to enter a new relationship with God, but the blood made it official. See? That's very interesting. It's like the blood confirmed it. Here it is. But notice when the blood made it official and it was ratified by blood. But notice it's like the blood brought it in. It's like God said this and the people said this. Okay, we're going to make this official. So Moses sprinkles blood on the people. He spreads it on the people. Now it's official. Now we are in this covenant. So you're no longer purified, but it's official. Now watch this. But notice what happens after this. But notice I'm going to read this, what happens before the blood. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 21, says, so the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. See that? Exodus 19:3, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel. Only Moses went up. In Exodus 19:8, all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Look at chapter 19 real quick, if you're with me. Chapter 19 and verse 10. Chapter 19 and verse 10. I'm going to read that. The Lord said to Moses, watch this. The Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, beware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. But something's going to change when God ratifies, he makes this new covenant official. So no, let's go back to chapter 14 and verse 8. So notice again, I want you to see this. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Now you're purified, and we have come to an agreement. There's no signing of contract. The blood did it. Notice we call it the blood of the covenant. You agreed. And so notice what happens after that. It's very interesting. Look at verse 9. After the blood was sprinkled on them, or he threw it on them, sprayed on them, then Moses, look at verse 9. Then Moses went up with Aaron. See, something changed. Then Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel. That should have been fatal. He said, don't come up. If anyone comes up, you will die. They will die. Remember, he said that Nadab and Abihu and Aaron and the 70 elders must worship at a distance. So now after the blood, when they said their words and God said his words and they agreed to it, and the blood made it official, then he says, the Bible says Moses went up with Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel, and under his feet there appeared to be a pavement of sapphire, as clear as the sky itself. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the nobles of the sons of Israel, for they saw God. Notice this, and they ate and they drank. And they ate and they drank. So now there's a fellowship going on. But before the blood, he said they cannot come up. If anyone touches the mountain, they're going to die. And but notice when they came to an agreement, but blood was involved. Remember, Leviticus 17:14, life is in the blood. And so, in other words, when Moses sprinkled the blood on the people, something had to die. It was an animal. Somebody gave his life for the people. And that satisfied the mind of God. And he says, now, you can come up, bring Aaron with you, bring Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders. Not only did they come up, the Bible says they saw God, and also they ate and they drank. Now they're having a fellowship with God. Fellowship. Because of the blood. But notice the word sprinkled. Watch this. Here we go. Take that and go to 1 Peter. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1. Here we go. 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. Notice what he says to them in 1 Peter chapter 1. Watch this. 1 Peter chapter 1. Watch this. Notice how Moses sprinkled the blood on the people. And that was, now this covenant is official. God made it official by the blood. And we saw the reality of it because they were told to stay at a distance. And after the blood, they were able to go and speak with God and eat and drink. There's a fellowship going on. But still not all of them. You notice who went up? Nadab and Abihu, Moses and Aaron, and the 70 elders. Not everybody. See, there's still a separation because the blood is not strong enough to bring everybody in. But watch how Peter puts this in 1 Peter chapter 1. Very interesting. That's very interesting. I'm saying 1 Peter chapter 1. Of course, this is me, but everything's going well. I'm in 2 Peter chapter 1. Look at 1 Peter chapter 1. Watch this. The saints are suffering. They're going through trials and tribulation. They are literally suffering. And notice what Peter says. Watch this. Verse 1. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, he was sent by Jesus Christ to those who resides as aliens scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, who are chosen. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 9, you'll see Cappadocia, you'll see Pontus, you'll see Asia. So they were in Acts chapter 2. And so I believe he's talking about this Jewish sect here. But he's going to remind them of something. Notice he says, who are chosen. Chosen how? According to the foreknowledge of God, the Father. Watch this. By the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to obey Jesus Christ, and sprinkling with his blood, may grace and peace be yours in the fullest measure. But notice what he says. Notice in the foreknowledge of God, he says, who are chosen according to the foreknowledge of God. Now watch this. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 23, that is the plan of God. The plan to save mankind that was in the mind of God before he created the world. And so he reminds them that you were chosen according to the foreknowledge of God, according to his plan. You followed his plan. And in this plan, it's a sanctifying work of the Spirit to obey Jesus Christ. Notice this. And sprinkled with his blood. So in his plan, now notice, you see Moses sprinkled the people with the blood of the animals. And Peter goes back and he mentions in his plan is a sprinkling with his blood. But notice this, his blood is the blood of Christ. In the book of Exodus, it's the blood of the animals. So Peter reminds them that you were sprinkled with his blood. In other words, you have entered a new covenant. Now you have been purified. I want you to see this. You have been purified, but remember, you have entered into a new covenant by the blood of Christ. In other words, the blood has been sprinkled on you. Well, now it wasn't the blood of animals. It was the blood of Christ. How could the blood of Christ be sprinkled on them? Because he said, watch what he says here. Now, I don't want you to be lost. Let's go back to verse 2. According to the full knowledge of God, the Father, by the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to obey Jesus Christ and the sprinkling with his blood. How was the blood sprinkled on them? Peter didn't stand there. Remember, if you go to Acts chapter 2, verse 9, Asia's there, Cappadocia is there, Pontus is there. So Peter didn't just take the blood of Christ and sprinkle it on them, because when Peter preached, Christ had already, he was already crucified, he already died, and he already resurrected, and he already ascended to the Father. So what is he talking about? He's reminding them that they don't, watch this. You not only have been baptized for the remission of sins, but you have entered a new relationship with God. You are now under a new covenant. You see, that blood of Christ brought you into, it's like the blood of Christ made it official now. You are now under, it's like you are now under a new covenant. Remember, the blood of Christ made it official. Now watch this. Go to Acts chapter 9, or rather Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9, watch. Now stay with me because I don't want you to get lost. Hebrews chapter 9, watch this. Hebrews chapter 9, to give you time to go there. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 12. If you like, go to it because I want you to see this. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 12. Notice this. In verse 12 of chapter 9 of the book of Hebrews, he says, and not through the blood of goats and calf, but through his own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. See, for it, if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled, see, there you go, there's a sprinkle again, sprinkle those who have been defiled, sanctified by the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, through the eternal Spirit, offer himself without blemish, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. See? Now watch. Let's keep going. He says, for this reason, he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of eternal inheritance because of the blood of Christ. For where a covenant is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. For a covenant is not valid only when men are dead. Notice this. A covenant is valid only when men are dead, for it is never enforced while the one who made it lives. And so in other words, Christ had to die to make this new covenant official. Now, Jeremiah chapter 31, God mentions to Jeremiah about 600 years before this, that this new covenant is coming, but it wasn't made official. See, it wasn't official. It wasn't ratified. It wasn't confirmed. Jeremiah said, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And so we know it's coming. And Jesus had to be crucified. Remember, his blood came from his body, poured from his body. He had to die. He was dead 3 days. He was resurrected. He was on earth 40 days with his disciples. And then he ascended back to the Father. Now here comes in Acts chapter 2, when Peter preaches the first gospel sermon, remember, to those of Pontus, all the Jews, but he mentions Pontus, he mentions Asia, he mentions Cappadocia. They were there. He reminds them, remember this. So Peter's preaching the first gospel sermon, and they adhere to that teaching. And they're baptized for the remission of sins. And when they're baptized for the remission of sins, that's how that's how they connected to the blood of Christ, and they entered a new relationship with God. That's how they can understand. That's how they connected to that blood by baptism. So when he said sprinkle, when he tells them, now watch this. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. And look at verse 19. Watch this. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 19. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 19. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Christ, that's a new relationship. He's talking about heaven. See, he's talking about heaven. Look at it. Well, let me stay here because I'm about to move around. And he says, watch this. Verse 20, how do you do that? By a new and living way, which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is his flesh. And so we enter this holy place, the heavenly realm, because of the blood of Christ. But how do we do that? By a new and living way, which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is his flesh. And so, in other words, this new and living way is the gospel, and the way it happened, the way it came into existence, the way it was made official, is through the blood of Christ. So now, because of the blood of Christ, it was made official. And now a person has to obey the new covenant to be saved. See, who shall tell you the words that you and all your house shall be saved? I think that's Acts 11:14. Acts 13:26, watch this. To you the words of this salvation is sent. Romans 1:16 and verse 17. The power is in the gospel for us to be saved. You see, the gospel has the power to save. But notice these words were said after Jesus did what he did, because now we're under the new covenant and his blood made it official. And that's what now let's go back. And so, now stay there. That's what he said. Watch this. He says, verse 22, watch this. Let us draw near because we can, with a sincere heart and full assurance, faith, having our hearts sprinkled, there it is again, from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water. Now watch. Let us hold fast the confession of hope without wavering, for he who promises faithful. Notice what he says again, the last part of verse 22. Having a heart sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Now watch this. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21, I'm going to go there quickly. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21. Notice what he says here. Notice what he says. He says, corresponding to that, baptism now saves us, not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God. And I looked up that in the Greek, and that's an inquiry. You're looking for an answer. You're seeking the truth. Seeking information by questioning. And so it's appeal to God and for a good conscience. So the answer to have a good conscience where your sins are taken away is through baptism. Now notice this, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because that's how God has it set up. When I'm baptized for the remission of sins, Romans 6:1-4, that's how I connect to the blood. And it's like the blood is sprinkled on me. And not only that, that's why when they said, remember he was talking to those that he mentions those in Pontus, from Cappadocia, from Asia. They were in the book of Acts when they were baptized in the book of Acts by the teacher Peter. And he goes back to remind them when they were sprinkled with the blood of Christ. And how does that happen? That when they enter the new covenant of Christ, well, when they were baptized for the remission of sins, see that? That's how they connected with the blood. That's how God designed it. And notice that. And they entered a new relationship with God. And I said this over and over and over. You see that? Right after they connected to the blood through baptism, what happened? God adds them to the church, those are being saved. So now they enter a new relationship. A new relationship. New relationship with the Father. Because they followed the plan because of the strength of the blood. So it's more than just, the blood of Christ is more than just, yes, it purifies us, but also because of the blood of Christ, we enter this new relationship with God, and it's by obeying this new covenant. You see, and as we follow his new covenant, and we're faithful to his new covenant, and we will be with him, and we have a relationship with him that will never end. But the climax of the relationship is at the end of time when the kingdom will be delivered to the Father by Jesus Christ. See? Watch this. I'll say, watch this. Hebrews 12:20-24. Enter Jesus, a mediator of a new covenant. Watch this. Watch this. Listen to this. And the sprinkled blood, which he speaks better than Abel, better than the blood of Abel. See that? I like that. Which speaks better than the blood of Abel. Notice the word sprinkle there. Hebrews 9:13 through 14. For the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling those who have been defiled, sanctified for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your consciences from dead works to serve the living God. See? But notice something real quick. I want to close at Isaiah chapter 52. I want you, if you like, turn to Isaiah chapter 52. Isaiah chapter 52. Watch this. Now, we talk about Isaiah 53, and that's extremely important. Extremely, dealing with the prophesying concerning, it's prophecy concerning Christ. But notice 52. I'm going to get there. Isaiah 52. I want you to, if you're there, I want you to recognize verse 15. Look at verse 13. I'm going to read verse 13, 14, and 15. Watch this. Behold, my servant will prosper. Yes, he will. And he will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Yes. Going back to the cross. It's Christ. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred, more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. This is Christ. Watch this. This is blood he's talking about, his crucifixion. Thus he will sprinkle many nations. You get it? He will, see, thus he will sprinkle many nations. His blood will benefit many nations, not just the Jewish nation. The Gentile nations also. He said, go out to the world and teach all nations. See, now, because of blood, many nations will be able to enter a new covenant with God. It goes beyond just the Jewish nation. So when you see the blood being sprinkled in the old covenant, you see how they did it put it on the utensils in the tabernacle. He sprinkled the blood on the people. Then you get to Christ. Because of the blood of Christ, we have now entered a new covenant. We have been purified. Now remember something. When you read 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and every Sunday, we remember the Lord's Supper. We do it every Sunday because that's what we are required to do, not once a month, not once a year, but every Sunday. Notice what he says here, and this is my last one. Watch this in verse 25. In the same way, he took the cup, also after supper, saying, this is the cup. This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Remember that when he sacrificed himself. And as we remember his death, remember the blood. But let's not only forget, don't forget that because of his blood, you see it, we remember that we have now entered a new covenant with God. And that's the only covenant, according to the book of Hebrews, where mankind can be saved. That's the only covenant in Hebrews chapter 7 that the whole world, if they obey God and obey that new covenant, can draw near to God. That's the only covenant through obedience where man can have eternal salvation. Notice salvation is with the Father. You remember in the beginning when I said, remember what happened After the blood, what they went up there and they met with the Father, with God, and they were eating and drinking. And you notice that. You look at many different parables in the Bible. What are they doing? You see them. They're eating and drinking, invited to the feast. That entails a wonderful fellowship that we never had before because of the blood of Christ, because of the new covenant. And notice that he added them to the kingdom. Why? See, in Galatians chapter 1 and verse 13, he delivered them from the power of darkness and transferred them into the kingdom of his dear son. That's where we follow the old covenant. You notice this. They were put in the kingdom, right? But notice this. That's all. That's where we follow the new covenant. That's where we obey the new covenant in the kingdom. That's why God put them there. They continue steadfastly in apostle doctrine, etc. In the name of the new covenant. Watch this. And within that kingdom, we stay faithful. 1 Corinthians 15:24. The kingdom, the faithful, those, that's including everybody, but especially those on the new covenant, will be delivered to the Father and will be with him for eternity. What a fellowship. What a fellowship. And it never ends. If we can help you, please come up and stand and sing a song for the invitation.